Everyone knows, at least everyone who's not been living under a rock for the last couple of days knows now that former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has decided to end her marriage to Peter Murrell. The announcement was made in the press. I'm guessing it was a bit of a surprise for the press, but not so much for perhaps the rest of us, that Nicola Sturgeon has decided at this moment that she and Peter should separate. Now, I'm not going to criticise this, but there are a couple of things I think that's worth pointing out. The first thing is that it's very easy to jump to the conclusion that this is some kind of confirmation of what we all suspected, and that would be that this was a marriage of convenience. Whether or not Peter Murrell and Nicola Sturgeon are heterosexual actually doesn't really matter to this, but I think a large number of us believed that this marriage between the former First Minister and the CEO of the SNP was definitely a marriage of convenience, because it united both the leader of the country with the leader of the party which governed, and that was the ultimate power couple. Since Nicola Sturgeon decided to resign, having failed to hold the referendum that she had promised, it's been very obvious that the United Kingdom has had this in mind all along, to humiliate the former First Minister in as many different ways as possible. And of course, their first go-to was the so-called missing £600,000 of donations, which the United Kingdom and the CPS, that's the English Crown Prosecution Service, the Crown Office and Police Scotland, and presumably the Procurator Fiscal Service, which are all buttoned up together, incidentally, under the oversight, if you like, of the UK's Crown Office, had decided to try to prosecute the couple for this alleged fraud. Now, it's beginning to appear as though Peter Murrell is going to be possibly the person who's going to carry the can if this goes to court, and that is a big if. And I think Nicola Sturgeon's decision to announce their marriage ending at this exact moment is not just a personal choice, because it has been obvious for some time that they've been living separate lives, partly because of this cloud of potential threat of a trial coming up about this missing money, but also the fact that it's potentially now imminent that something is going to happen to Peter Murrell, because for Nicola Sturgeon to end or announce the end of their marriage at this exact moment is believed to mean that something is imminently about to happen to Peter Murrell. And it's possible that the prosecution services, or in our case the Procurator Fiscal Service here in Scotland, is going to take some kind of court action against Mr. Murrell, despite the fact that after 3.5 years of the so-called Operation Branchform, nothing has been announced in terms of evidence that supports such a trial. Now, does this matter at all in the great scheme of things? Well, if you couple it to the other piece of news which emerged about 2 or 3 days ago, that both Nicola Sturgeon, former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, and the current First Minister John Swinney both made comments that they had personally had to, and I'm using inverted commas here, intervene to prevent Alex Salmond from being brisk, in inverted commas, with his staff, is a bizarre thing to say. If they had said, we stepped in to prevent Alex Salmond from slapping somebody in the face or making them cry, that would have been different, but that is not what was actually said. It was implied with this weird set of words that said that they intervened to prevent him being brisk. Now, what does being brisk mean? Nobody really knows. Alex Salmond was a driven man, and I guess working for him meant that he would make demands on his staff to work as hard as he did and to take actions that he wanted them to take. That is the nature of being a top-down boss of that type. It's possible that some people did feel a bit put upon, or were forced to take actions and didn't feel they were treated particularly well, but that is not the same thing as abuse, and it's not the same thing as having to intervene to prevent so-called bullying. Now, bullying is a serious offence, and it's something which shouldn't happen in the workplace. But on the other hand, in the case of a First Minister who's running a country, his staff really have to be switched on and ready to do what is necessary to action things to draw up legislation, to check the wording of speeches and so on. All of these things are vitally important to get right and right first time, and that puts a lot of pressure on staff. But coupling these two events, this last week's news that both John Swinney and Nicola Sturgeon claim that they had to allegedly intervene to prevent Mr. Salmond being brisk is yet another veiled, softly worded inference that Mr. Salmond was somehow bullying his underlings, when there is absolutely no evidence of this, and nobody from Mr. Salmond's former administration who worked with him has ever come forward with any allegations of bullying which support this alleged briskness, which I think is laughable. It is almost as if Mr. Murrell and Miss Sturgeon and John Swinney are being used by the United Kingdom's mainstream media to produce a narrative which both damages Nicola Sturgeon, damages Mr. Murrell, and further impugns the reputation of the late First Minister Alex Salmond. Now, for his widow to have to issue a statement asking people to lay off the memory of her late husband shows you how desperate the United Kingdom is to rubbish all SNP First Ministers, both dead, alive, former and current. And this is part of a wider media campaign to basically tell the Scots that the SNP's leadership of all kinds, past and present, both dead and alive, are horrible people. Now, if you add to that the very bizarre decision which Nicola Sturgeon took, and incidentally Mary Black also seemed to take, for her to become, as a second career, if you like, a stand-up comedian, baffled me. It baffled many people for a number of reasons. It didn't sound like the sort of thing a woman with the kind of reputation which Ms. Sturgeon had as a politician would suddenly decide to become a clown. Basically, that is what this implies as well. And this also seems extremely strange. Who suggested to Nicola Sturgeon that she should go on the comedy circuit? And even more interesting, why did Mary Black decide to do it? Now, to be fair to Mary Black, she can be quite funny. And perhaps I could have understood her decision to become a stand-up comic because she speaks broad Glaswegian. I think she actually came from Paisley originally, but she can be pretty amusing, and that might make some sense. But for the former First Minister to do it doesn't. And when so many things that either make sense or don't make sense in the context of a former First Minister happen together, you can't really dismiss all of this as pure coincidence. It seems to me, and to many other people, to have been carefully orchestrated well in advance. And remember, in politics, nothing ever happens by accident or coincidentally. Most things are planned well ahead. So my suspicion is, at the moment, this is the final chapter in the United Kingdom's massive smear campaign, firstly against former First Minister Alex Salmond, who has been, or whose widow has seen his memory trampled in the dirt by the mainstream media, but even worse, by his former protege, Nicola Sturgeon, and John Swinney as well, both of whom were in Mr. Salmond's original administration. That's very weird. But then to have Nicola Sturgeon ridiculed in the way that she has been, to leave her office under a cloud after actually giving the United Kingdom Supreme Court the opportunity to say that we can't have a referendum, none of this is accidental. However, does it affect what's going to happen next year? Remember, this is 2025, and the next Holyrood election is next year in 2026. Well, it says one thing to me, and that is that the United Kingdom's media and the politicians involved in these strange occurrences, that's Nicola Sturgeon, John Swinney, and to some extent Peter Murrell, I guess, although he's not a politician, these things, I think, are sent really being pushed heavily in the media to give us the impression that we should not trust any SNP politician when we go into the ballot box next year. Now, many of us already felt that way and felt that we didn't trust our SNP politicians anymore because it looks, and based on the evidence I've just presented there, it looks very much like they have been got at either by being coerced or because they are cooperating willingly. Now, I actually think the latter is very unlikely. I do not think that Nicola Sturgeon would have been doing this kind of thing, saying these kind of things, if she weren't being coerced in some way or other. The ending of her marriage, I think, is an indication that something is about to happen, which she does not want to be associated with, presumably to do with her soon-to-be ex-husband, Peter Murrell. Now, if that's the case, then what's going to happen to Peter Murrell will probably be the last act of this gigantic smear campaign, the final nail in the coffin, as the United Kingdom would see it, for the SNP as a viable party of government in Scotland. Now, in trashing it so comprehensively like this, and believe it or not, the UK is well able to mount such a long-term insidious campaign as this over decades if they feel like it, that leaves the rest of us poor voters with a bit of a problem. Who do we vote for in the upcoming general election to Holyrood? I had suggested 2 or 3 programmes ago a thing called the Spartacus initiative, which would see many of us, just ordinary people, working people who are maybe activists promoting Scotland's cause for independence, actually stepping up and saying, I'm going to stand as an independent candidate for independence, and I'm not going to represent any party at all. Now, I have to caveat that with my support for the ISP. Now, the Independence for Scotland party under Colette Walker has taken a very different approach to the whole cause of independence, and they are very much putting that to the front and campaigning for independence and for there to be a vote on independence so that we can settle this once and for all. So I tend not to include the ISP in this grouping of politicians. Now, I do not know enough about ALBA to make any comment at all about them. My experience so far watching the feeds regarding ALBA is that there is a great deal of sniping going on between some activists in ALBA and some activists from the SNP still having a go at one another. But then, given the fact that the British media has presented the SNP in such a poor light and made it appear to be corrupt and incompetent, and still focusing so ridiculously on the fact that a ferry was 20 minutes late departing as a major news headline, it just goes to show you how desperate they are to give us all the impression that our politicians can't be trusted. If, like me, you've never really felt the need to join a political party, but you are committed to independence and prepared, perhaps, to give up your job for 5 years and stand as a candidate in the upcoming general election for Holyrood, then I would recommend that you do it. In the last 10 days, I was approached by a Yes group in one of the rural coastal communities of Scotland who asked me if I would stand. Now, to be honest with you, I had mentioned the fact that I would consider standing, but you need to have a fair amount of support for that. I don't know if I have that support. So at the moment, I'm seriously considering this invitation. But in the process of looking into this, I need to do 2 things. First of all, I need to visit this group. I need to speak to them. I need to speak at a public meeting. I need to present myself and what I would do if I was elected, what I would be fighting for, and who I would align myself with in order to get this done. So that requires me to do quite a lot of work and research beforehand and to present this to this Yes group in situ, so they can see me face to face and judge whether I'm a suitable candidate or not. And I think if anyone is considering doing this, you may wish to join a party like ALBA or the ISP in order to do this if you want the support that a party can give you, and I wouldn't ever not recommend that. But some of us, like myself, who are perhaps a bit more absolutist and want to stand as individuals, I think you should consider it. And I can think of a number of people I know on these channels who have their own podcasts, who have their own broadcasts, who do their own video making and their own blogging, who could potentially stand and would be recognizable and supportable. Anyway, that is about it for Inde-Car today, but really I'm trying to put the pieces together of what's happened in the last few days, culminating in this announcement of the Murrell marriage breakup and what it might actually mean in the future. But it does not mean particularly that anyone in the SNP is particularly corrupt. Although I'd have to say that Mr. Swinney's administration seems to be dithering on the sidelines and has been, I think you'd have to say, inferring all sorts of unpleasant things about the former First Minister Alex Salmond on the sidelines, and that is not helpful, and that looks deeply suspicious to most independence-minded voters. So that kind of thing, if the SNP is to get anyone elected in 2026, they need to clear that out, and they need to re-establish themselves as a party of independence first and foremost, and not a devolutionary party which is going to take part in whatever smear campaigns the United Kingdom decides to mount. The more of us, I'm talking about the more ordinary people, stand and successfully get elected, the harder it is for the United Kingdom to target the leader of a group, because if you're not in a group, then you're not a leader of a group, and therefore not worthy of the kind of negative attention which all of the main leaders of parties normally attract. And that would be the strength of the so-called Spartacus initiative. If we have enough of us who are not party aligned getting elected into a pro-independence grouping at Holyrood. Now that could include both the SNP members, whoever they are if they get elected, perhaps ALPA members as well being elected, and ISP members being elected too. And that would give a very broad cross-section of the Scottish pro-independence populace being represented in majority and being able to form a majority government, an absolute majority, not one which relies on other parties for support. And that would be a good thing, because that would broaden out the scope. It would make it harder for the United Kingdom to zero in on one or two particular leaders and mean that there is a lot of redundancy. In other words, there are a lot of extra people there who are prepared to step in if one of the leaders of the independence-minded Scottish government, which comes into being in 2026, if one of them is attacked, then, like Article 5 in the NATO treaty, if there's an attack on one, it's an attack on all of us, and we all rally around and we all support that person. So there are a lot of things to unpack here, but I would guard against attacking Nicola Sturgeon at the moment. Nah, not really interested in doing that. I think it's self-evident why she's doing this. There are two reasons. I think perhaps the marriage was initially a marriage of convenience and it's now become inconvenient. But also I think Nicola Sturgeon was wanting to separate herself from whatever happens to her husband or former husband in the near future, so that she can survive whatever the United Kingdom's police services and prosecution services are planning to do to Mr. Murrell. But I think by the time whatever has happened to Mr. Murrell happens, that may be the last piece in the United Kingdom's plan to basically detach the independence movement from the SNP, to cut us adrift, and to make us all distrust our politicians. Many politicians that we have at the moment are perfectly good, loyal, honest people, and yet we're getting the impression from the media that they're not because of what one or two people are doing, and that is dangerous. And that kind of attack is happening in all democracies across the Western world at the moment. There are right-wingers like Nigel Farage and Elon Musk, Donald Trump, all pecking away at the legitimacy of our democracy, and we need to fight that with everything we've got. And democracy is us, the people, the voters. It's not the politicians. And we have to resist the temptation to distrust the institution of democracy and instead use it to get the government that we really, really need in 2026. Anyway, I guess that's it from me today, a bit verbose. I apologise for that. But I just want to get you thinking about how and who you vote for in 2026 going forwards, based on the attempt at a complete smear of the SNP by the British state media and the United Kingdom in general. It's having an effect, but we need to keep in mind that that's what it was intended to do. We need to keep faith in ourselves. I always say keep the faith at the end of each broadcast. I mean it as in keep faith with each other and I include our politicians in that. And there are many, many politicians who I do like, and I want to stay in the pro-independence group in Holyrood after 2026. That's it from Inde-Car today. I'll see you all soon. Thank you for staying with me, and thank you for all your comments as well. It's not always possible for me to read them all as I'm going live. They kind of come up on the screen and then fade away. But keep the faith, think about what I've said, and think about who we're going to vote for, and if you want to be one of those people that is voted for. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.